When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome back to the Vital Point Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a transformation coach and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. My guest on this episode is Jonathan Waller, who's an archetypal astrologer, poet, and writer. He was inspired in equal parts by Carl Jung, Stanislav Grof, and astrologer Richard Tarnas. And he uses astrology as a therapeutic and creative tool to aid, guide, and help people on their paths towards wholeness through one-on-one coaching and group work. He's also a vocal advocate for psychedelic therapy and holotropic breathwork, and uses archetypal astrology as a tool to help people prepare for and integrate experiences of expanded states of consciousness. And this is an episode where I got more than maybe I thought I was going to going in. I had a growing curiosity about astrology as it relates to the breathwork for transformation sessions that I run, and certain things that have happened in my own life that seem like they've aligned with solstices and full moons and other astrological events. And so I connected with Jonathan and asked if I could, interview him and learn more about archetypal astrology. And it became very clear to me, especially as I went back to edit this episode, that not only did I not really understand what archetypal astrology was going in, I actually had some misconceptions and was maybe mixing it up with some other types of astrology. And so it truly was a nice sort of change of pace to, kind of sit back and really try to listen and absorb and learn, trying to understand. Like I said, there was definitely some misconceptions that I noticed, especially as I went back to do the editing. The explanation is really what we start off with and kind of go through during the first part of the episode. Then we get into a really beautiful conversation about one of the most important aspects about working with expanded states of consciousness, which is surrender. Just really opening to whatever's coming up, even if what's coming up isn't beautiful and pleasant, it's not all euphoric. Sometimes this work can be very challenging. It can bring up, deep stuff, and being able to sit with that, to allow it to move through you, is a very important part. And I really appreciated the perspective and words that Jonathan shared around this. And I really felt that it was clear to me that Jonathan was speaking from his own experience with breathwork, with psychedelics, as far as what he had to contribute to the conversation. Since then, I've been really pleased to continue getting to know him. He's been coming to my breathwork sessions. He did a reading for me. And so I'm continuing to explore the archetypal astrology and what that means to me, and digesting it in terms of integration. And speaking of breathwork, if you're interested in deepening your own practice, I have my breathwork for transformation sessions online. There's 2 sessions that are open to anyone, twice a month on the second and fourth Sunday of the month. Those are $30 each session, or for $45 a month, there are those 2 open sessions, plus a third full moon session that's only for subscribers, and a weekly integrative breathwork session that's a combination of breathwork and peer integration support. So all that for $45 a month. It's a great value, and it's just a wonderful thing for me as a facilitator to see this community continuing to grow and flourish, and watching people really taking their breath work seriously, integrating it into their process for development and transformation and exploration, and really treating it as a practice, because that's when breath work became truly transformative to me, is when I began practicing it on a regular basis and really started paying more attention to the integration process. So if you're interested in joining either of those, go to beacons.ai/Blue Magic Alchemy, and I'll link that in the show page. Again, that's beacons.ai/Blue Magic Alchemy. And now, without further ado, my conversation with Jonathan Waller. So I'm really excited to have Jonathan on the show. We connected over a curiosity of mine, in which Jonathan is much more educated, has a lot of information, and I was really curious to hear more about this area of expertise of his, archetypal astrology. And my curiosity, if I wanted to sort of like peel back the layers of the onion, the first layer would be doing the breath work for transformation sessions on the full moon, which again was like, I wonder if this would be cool to do on the full moon. And then as I started to have the sessions, the participants were like, wow, that was a really powerful session. What the heck just happened there? And I realized, okay, I was onto something. And then if I wanted to peel the layer back a little bit more, it would be reflecting on, since I've started my healing journey, just noticing that a lot of significant events seem to align with full moons, with solstices, with these different astrological occurrences. And myself, as a complete novice, just starting to chalk it up to coincidence. And then at some point, there's a lot here for it to be a coincidence. I think that's a good place to dive in, is what exactly is archetypal astrology? Could you give us a brief overview of it in like simplest terms? Because I really do need those simple terms as well at this point.
Yeah, sure. So, archetypal astrology is, I guess, set apart from other types of astrology in a few ways. The primary focus of it is on the sun, moon, and planets of our solar system. As archetypal astrologers, we pay a lot less attention to signs of the zodiac, houses, fixed stars, asteroids, lots of other data points, which for sure, from an astrological perspective, hold some interest. But in archetypal astrology, they're all taken as kind of secondary symbol sets that are of a secondary kind of significance, less potent and less interesting to us as astrologers. Still valid. That kind of helps to simplify the equation in terms of when we're looking for significances, correlations between, say, planetary dynamics or cosmic activity in general, correlations between that and our own experience. When we have a lot of different overlapping symbol sets and symbol systems, it can become quite easy to find whatever significance we're looking for, to just kind of have a theory, have an idea, and then kind of project it into the astrological charts. And if you have a lot of different symbols to work with that all overlap and mutually inflect each other, at a certain point, it gets to the point where you can find just about anything you want to find. So by limiting the focus just the planets in the solar system, we hope to ameliorate some of that confusion and the kind of propensity for projection that we all have. archetypal astrologers are certainly not immune to psychological projection. What we primarily study is the kind of the geometric relationships between the different planets in the solar system from the Earth's perspective. So there are certain angles when you plot the different planets on the chart, which is represented as a circle. There are certain angles that seem to be of particular importance. So when things are conjunct in the sky, so that's kind of a 0 degree angle. When things are opposite in the sky, so that's kind of a 180 degree angle. Or when things are at the 90 degree and 270 degree points, so kind of forming a square on the circular depiction of the zodiac. And then when things are at 120 or 60 degrees, so that's kind of forming triangles on the circular chart. Research has shown that these particular angles, when the planets make these particular angles on the chart, the archetypal forces that are correlated with those planets seem to come to the forefront of the psyche and combine in particular ways. So, in a word, that's what the study of archetypal astrology is understanding the archetypes that seem to be associated with the planets, and then understanding, in some depth, the way in which they combine. How's that?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you brought in the projection, because I think that was where I was at before some of these things started happening. Was like, well, this is just people projecting what they want to see based on having a lot of different data points and a lot of different, like a big field of ambiguity to pick from. That's what I would have said. I like that you mentioned the research, because that was a big turning point for me, was discovering that Stan Groff, who I hold in very high regard, had spent years, and written these papers saying, no, this is real stuff. And you could kind of plan your psychedelic journeys or your breath work when you're going into these expanded states. You should be paying attention to these things. And that was what really sparked my curiosity for more. Yeah. And really connected us. I was like, oh wait. And it was a good synchronicity. I think it was like right around the time where I was like, okay, I have this very surface level understanding of all this, and I'd like to learn more. And then somehow your profile popped up on Facebook, and I was like, okay, well, what a great opportunity I have for the podcast to, I could sit here and try to study a bunch of papers and, a bunch of things and try to digest it myself and then share it with my audience. Or I could just go more to the source and, talk with somebody and learn from them and just be curious about it. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And I'd love to hear more about, because I know more about Stan Groff than Richard Tarnas as the other person that's really involved in this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to express some gratitude for your curiosity, and I'm sure your listenership is more open-minded than the average pool of people when it comes to things like this. And I'm sure there's probably a few people who still harbor a lot of skepticism about astrology, and welcome that, and that's okay. And hopefully I can say some things that are at least intriguing and interesting, and we'll see how we get on.
Yeah.
Just on that note as well, before diving into Tarnas and Groff, we want to also say that kind of without getting too heady and metaphysical about it, it's kind of important to mention that in archetypal astrology, the claim is really not that the planets cause things to happen. It's not. There's no claim here that the planets emit some kind of force that we don't know how to detect. That's kind of affecting us on a physiological level and forcing things to happen. It's more that um, it's building on Jung's concept of synchronicity. An acausal connecting principle. So the idea that things can be connected, meaningfully correlated in terms of their meaning, without being linked by a kind of deterministic chain of cause and effect. So the suggestion is that we, as well as the planets, as well as everything in the universe, kind of co-participate in this synchronistic field of meaning, and that if that's the case, we would expect there to be, like you say, a lot of coincidences, a lot of synchronicities or meaningful coincidences. So yeah, it's just worth saying that we're not we're not suggesting a kind of determinism or a kind of fatalistic subservience to the archetypes.
Right.
It's a field that we mutually participate in, and what we do with our free will, however much of it we have, it matters, and it is of
Yeah.
consequence. So just to mention that, um, include.
Is it somewhat of like I guess what's coming to mind as you're saying that is like something like the butterfly effect, like where there are, I think of the butterfly effect, and I think of the way that the moon, which is our closest body to us, right, affects the tides. You can measure how the tides are changing by this body that's what, hundreds of thousands of miles away from
Mm,
us, but it's exerting some sort of
mm,
force. There's a field that's impacting us there, and within like the psychedelic space, for instance, um, and I guess within the meditation space as well. Um, I've had experiences where I can experience how like the Icaros that the facilitators are singing, or the prayer wheel that I'm spinning, that's generating that sort of intention of
mhm,
love and healing into the room, into the space, how that's affecting the energy in that contained space. And so to me, that's how I'm understanding it. And I would love it if you correct me if I'm wrong here. But that there's almost like these are similar types of sort of pulls or influences, but just on a much more massive
yeah,
scale, right?
yeah. I mean, how I like to think about it, um, if we think of the kind of field of meaning in the universe as a symphony, say, then
Hmm.
it's as though when the planets are interacting with each other, they give each other impetus, energy that brings them into the foreground of psychological activity, and they mutually, as the kind of archetypal energy comes into the foreground of the cosmic symphony. Um, the archetypes, uh, they interpenetrate, they overlap, they mutually inflect each other in various different ways, and there's almost the ways in which they mutually inflect are extremely varied, yet very much identifiable in terms of their archetypal character and characteristic. You know, just on the moon, the moon definitely affects us on a physiological level. It's pretty much the
Right.
only planet that the sun and moon are pretty much the only planetary bodies that we can say that about for sure. When it comes to the moon, there are plankton and algae that time there blooms 2 days after the sixth full moon of the year. and they do that with astonishing regularity, and they are organisms that have remained evolutionarily unchanged for millions and millions of years. And those are the types of organisms that we are evolved from, um, in some sense. So the awareness of the lunar cycle is deeply, deeply encoded into our bodies at the cellular level. Um, you know, in order to be a cell, you could argue that some implicit awareness of the lunar cycles might even be a prerequisite of the type of life that exists on this planet. Probably a bold claim. So hence the maybe around it. So when it comes to the other planets, I see the patterns, I see the evidence, I see it manifesting. The how, the the
Right.
mechanism that ties it together, I don't know. It's a mystery, and I'm happy to be oriented towards the deepening of my relationship to that mystery, as opposed to being in a kind of investigative mode where I'm trying to collapse it down to the how, some equation that I can understand and say, that's it, that's how it works. It's less interesting to me. But there are astrologers who are interested in that. And many theories of varying interest to me and varying validity probably. But the butterfly effect thing is also an interesting metaphor for it. We're kind of talking about chaos theory, right, with the butterfly effect, and a very important, like, fundamental axiom in chaos theory is the sensitivity to starting conditions. So the birth chart, the depiction of the zodiac as it was when a person was born, is a depiction of the starting conditions. We can see the solar system as a kind of clock that tells the archetypal time. It's a useful metaphor for a few reasons. It shows you the archetypal time of day that you were born. It tells you the starting conditions. And like, if we understand, I don't have a deep understanding of chaos theory, but if we understand astrology as working through chaos theory, then it makes sense that an individual that comes into existence at a certain archetypal time will carry a kind of time stamp in the psyche. The other thing that's useful about the clock metaphor, well, two things. Just because you have a clock that works, you would never, on that basis, expect that the clock is therefore the source of time itself. The clock just tells the time. It's in sync with the passing of time. So it's a useful thing. So the solar system is thus useful as a clock, but we don't necessarily, on that basis, jump to believing that the planets are the source of the archetypal energy. They're just in sync with the archetypal passing of energy through the universe, participating in it the same way that we do. And finally, just because you've built a clock that works, you would not, on that basis, declare that no other clock designs are possible. If you've built a clock, you've built a grandfather clock, you just invented it, with all the mechanisms and stuff, you'd be crazy to say digital clocks cannot work because this is the only one. So many ways of interpreting the symbolic kind of layer of our universe exist and are valid. And so a few things to maybe to respond to there, but
Yeah, I love that. There's what I heard is just an acknowledgement of beautiful synchronicity or synchronicities that exist that we can access in a little way. Maybe like what the metaphor that's coming up to me is like, you know, looking through a keyhole,
Mm.
and getting a glimpse that there's a much bigger reality there that maybe we're not always tapped into on a cognitive level, and that's
Mm.
okay. Well, we don't have to. And it sounds like it's a rabbit hole that one could really go down as far as like trying to put some meaning and like really figure it out and have a definitive, this is what this is all about. Or you can just say, hey, I'm acknowledging that there's a lot of beauty and synchronicity that, and choosing to acknowledge it, choosing to breathe with it
Yeah.
and appreciate it rather than trying to figure it
Yeah.
out. And then I also love the metaphor that you used of the different clocks, you know, and the different mechanisms within the different clocks. And um, I like the juxtaposition between the grandfather clock and the digital clock. And what also came up was the
Mm.
sundial, you know, and that these are all telling time as long as they're aligned in the right way, right? And they're still on the system, like they're still working to a certain degree, right? If you set the digital clock an hour ahead, it's still counting the seconds and the minutes and the hours. It might be an hour ahead depending on your perspective. um but yeah, that's a beautiful metaphor. These different systems and different ways of connecting to that
Mm.
symphony.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in archetypal astrology? What made you interested in it?
I guess a few things converged for me. Um, my primary interest, kind of psychologically, philosophically, before being opened to astrology, was Jung. Um, so I spent a lot of time during the pandemic uh, reading various parts of Jung's collected works, trying to read them, with varying degrees of comprehension and success. It has to be said, he's a tough cookie. Um, and so, yeah, I was writing a lot about Jung at the time. Trying to kind of write about my experience of trying to understand him. Um, and it was in that process that at one time, I mean, this is good because it'll lead on to Tarnas and Groff. Um, at one point, I realized that in order to read Jung well, I would need a better, deeper, more comprehensive understanding of the kind of cultural context in which he was himself writing. Um,
Mm.
so I'd heard of Richard Tarnas, and I had heard of his book, The Passion of the Western Mind, which is not in any way an astrological book. Um, it's kind of a comprehensive telling of the story of the Western mind from the time of the pre-Socratic uh, Greek philosophers, kind of through to like just about the beginning of post-modernity. Um, and I knew that he himself was a Jungian, and I thought, well, if I'm going to, read something like this, I'll read the one that's written by a Jungian. And I was really blown away by his ability to articulate trends and zeitgeists and kind of categories of thought and the different um, sort of underlying themes that kind of underpinned different philosophical, scientific, religious movements and developments in a way that was, very flowing, very comprehensible. And I've realized now um, that it's his archetypal eye. It's his eye for, um, you know, it's his understanding of the different archetypal categories of human experience that allowed him to kind of put forth that story in such a um, an unusually flowing and comprehensible manner. So having read that book, I was very, very grateful to him, and trusted him, pretty much implicitly, because it's a serious work, and I learned a lot, and I really admired him as a writer. So at that point, I had heard of Cosmos and Psyche, without really knowing too much about it. And I saw an interview with him where he spoke about the connection between, between astrology and psychedelic therapy, and his time meeting Stan Grof. And that's when I started, the first inkling of taking astrology seriously really kicked in for me. So maybe I'll just tell that story in brief. So Rick Tarnas and Stan Grof met, I believe, in the early 70s at Esalen Institute. By this point, Stan had been working as a therapist, conducting LSD trials for over a decade, or about a decade. And he had a great deal of case studies and material to analyze. And him and Richard Tarnas, neither of them particularly interested in astrology at this time, were attempting to find some ways of explaining what was going on with LSD.
Right.
Why is it that some people take LSD and they have experiences of dissolving into unified oneness, with the Tao, these pure bliss, oceanic spirituality type experiences, while someone else who takes it, even at the same time on the same day, could have an experience of descending into hell, and confronting demons, or having the world crumble and be destroyed, and reforming anew in front of them. Why is it that some people who had been committed to their religious faith for their whole lives could seemingly lose it, and whilst other people who had been equally committed atheists could suddenly find a spiritual path? What's going on? So I think they looked at a lot of stuff, a lot of factors, trying to predict, find some predictive capacity, find some interpretive capacity, without very much success. It's actually very hard. A very hard thing to do is predict what's going to happen when you take acid,
Right.
So, and it has to be said, even with astrology, it's still hard. But somebody, some fateful individual whose name I can't remember, apologies to that person, a colleague of theirs suggested that they look at people's natal charts, look at their planetary placements, so look at where the planets were when the person was born, and then look at the relative positions of the planets on the day of the session. And lo and behold, there was a striking number of correlations, far more correlations than they had found tracking any other metrics. So, it was at that point that Richard Tarnas, Stan Grof has not, to my knowledge, done loads and loads of astrological research, but Richard Tarnas's life at that point became essentially about understanding, like, what's going on there. And so he actually then wrote Passion of the Western Mind before releasing any astrological work whatsoever, in order to establish himself as a credible person, a serious intellectual, a historian and philosopher in his own right of some repute, um, and then finally released Cosmos and Psyche, which is the foundational text for archetypal astrology, in 2006 or 2007. The trick, it worked on me, and yeah. So since then, that's kind of also been my focus. I took a course with a great astrologer and a personal mentor that I'm very grateful to, Ren Butler. Following that, and then took it again, and in slightly more of a helping role, I guess, the following year, and yeah, the rest is history, really.
Yeah, I didn't know when I started Googling, I found a couple of papers that Stan's name was on. And so I just assumed that it was more of a sort of mutual, like they both contributed the same amount. So that's really interesting to know that, even though that was what brought my curiosity in, it's interesting to
I
learn
mean,
that.
Stan
'Cause
definitely contributed greatly to the archetypal astrology cause, but I feel that
yeah,
his calling has been much more on the psychedelic side, whereas Tarnas's calling seems to have been to kind of fill out the astrological side of the puzzle there.
yeah, and so many different dimensions. I think for me, learning about Stan Grof's work, one of the most fascinating was the perinatal matrices, and like how, his theory of how our experiences during the birthing process contributed to these archetypal experiences that we can experience within psychedelics or, other
Mm.
expanded states. And to me, it really made a lot of sense of like, oh, well, this is one possible reason why people tend to have these similar experiences, because we've had these similar experiences during birth and didn't have a way to complete that trauma cycle or like express like, hey, that was really scary being in that tunnel
Yeah,
for so long.
yeah,
Things like that. So I'm constantly fascinated by how deep these rabbit holes
mm,
can go, in terms of and just so grateful that there are people out here that have dedicated their lives and big chunks of their lives at least to doing this research and to being curious. And because it's in the same way that like I feel like I'm getting a crash course of education listening to you. There's so many of these giants that we can like
mm,
really say thank you for doing all this work and for distilling it down into something that I can digest in a few hours, at least on a
yeah,
tertiary level, rather than spend the next 20 years trying to investigate and get curious
yeah,
about. So it's just, I feel like the more I learn about anything in the transpersonal realm, the more fascination and the more gratitude I come
mm,
away with, because there's so much
yeah,
there.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about the perinatal matrices and how they fit in with the astrological picture, because it's really one of the
Beautiful.
most uh, stunning and uh, just fascinating aspects of it. Um, so what one of the things that Richard Tarnas and Stan Grof have kind of co-discovered, um, is that the perinatal matrices, as described by Grof, so uh, BPM 1, the unitive womb experience, experiences of bliss and yeah, oceanic feelings and divine connection and stillness and peace, uh, being the kind of happy womb experience. Um,
Right.
um, Tarnas found that this is exactly the same archetypal resonance as the planet Neptune. Um, so that's of some interest, to people who are doing psychedelic sessions. You often see that people who have Neptune activated by transit with other planets will have those types of experiences more available to them. Um, BPM 2, the toxic womb experience, where the unborn child kind of first encounters the universe as an oppressive force. It's the first experience of disconnection, uh, loneliness, abandonment, um, boundaries, constraint, limitation. This is the same archetypal complex, pretty much precisely as the planet Saturn. So again, it's very,
Wow.
very interesting, very much of use. BPM 3, when the baby's in the birth canal and is in great danger, under great pressure, um, with a sensation of movement, the possibility of light at the end of the tunnel. This is the feelings that people experience in psychedelic sessions that are associated with BPM 3 are represent the same complex of feelings uh, that are associated with the planet Pluto. Um, Transformation, death, and rebirth. Um, Erotic feelings. It's a strange one to bring up with people who haven't sort of been initiated into Groff's worldview, but you know, many people experience in sessions when they're reliving passage through the birth canal, their first kind of erotic or sexual experience, and it often can have to do with if the cord is tied around the neck, um, things like that. It kind of that whole complex of things, which you wouldn't necessarily intuitively put together just on a logical basis, that they are all archetypally in the same category, and that is the category that seems to be presided over by Pluto. And then finally, BPM 4, the ecstatic experience of rebirth, um, the states of kind of active ecstasy. Um, these are associated with Uranus. So it's really an amazing synchronicity that the 4 stages of birth are just very, very well described by the 4 outer planets of our solar system.
Yeah, no, it's what's funny is I think one thought that came up was that there have been a few episodes on the show that I feel are like, okay, like if you're just brand new to certain things, you're curious about transformation, this is a good place to jump in. And we're definitely getting into some deeper water here, right? So just to acknowledge that and to invite people, if any of this is really like, if you're like, I want to learn more, I mean, I feel like we could do a whole podcast about just the perinatal matrices, right? So it's a really deep topic that we're jumping into, and one that I found fascinating. I would definitely recommend, doing some reading if it's of interest. But yeah, that was the other thing that jumped out, was like, okay, the 4 outer planets. And so, I guess my next question is like, well, what about the inner planets? What are those tied to? And then in the back of my mind is also, I think, a thing that we're sort of slowly driving towards, which is how can people use this information to sort of like
Yeah.
to work with their inner work, whether that's breath work or psychedelics or anything. And I think we'll get
Yeah.
there. And I like the path that we're taking to get there.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah, it's a beautiful, big, uh, glorious topic, of these different dimensions that we're dipping into.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it blows me away to think about it. And what it brings up for me is just, a great feeling of connection with the cosmos, because it's like, even as we're
Yeah.
before we do anything really out of choice, we're already participating in these dynamics. We're already um, getting to grips with the archetypal underpinning of our cosmos, and yeah, that just it's a good feeling for people who are open to to it. It's nice. It's grounding, even kind of grounding oneself in the furthest reaches of
Yeah.
of the solar system might seem like a funny thing, but it certainly has that effect for me.
It is grounding to me. It's grounding to me that there are systems, that, and it reminds me of experience I had once during an ayahuasca ceremony that was really transformative. We were in this dark room for most of the ceremony, and towards the end, the facilitators lit a fire, and I had this experience. Well, I had a few different experiences. The first one was um, that, like, I felt connected to my ancestors, and I felt connected to all the people throughout history that had gathered around a fire, and the healing that had happened within those isolated events and those isolated fires, but had that knowledge on this very subconscious level of that there's safety, that there's food, that there's gathering and connection and healing. It's almost in our DNA, whether we realize it or not. There's just something very healing about being around a fire. And I experienced that through this sort of seeing it as my ancestors, of fire being this magic, because there was a point where there was no fire, and then there was, and that somebody had to tend to it, and it was this force that they didn't understand in the way that we do now. Right now we can say, oh, here's the science behind fire, and this is what makes it, and these molecules interacting with each other, and the different elements, and everything like that. Right, we can systematize it, we can explain it through that lens. And it led into this curiosity of, well, what if everything that we don't understand, that we consider magic, or we consider, no, this is unexplainable, this is transpersonal, what if all of that is just fire that we just haven't figured out how to explain the science behind yet? And what if magic is just science that we haven't figured
Yeah,
out?
yeah, and yeah, certainly medicine work is one way to, you talked about earlier as well, looking through the keyhole. It's just, it's a way to widen that aperture just a little bit. Or, I think it was Groff who said that LSD would be for psychology what the telescope was for astronomy, and what the microscope was for biology or chemistry. Um, it's kind of
Yeah.
opening up the possibility of a broader view, an expanded uh, consciousness, allowing us more angles, um, on from which to see our experience, um, and kind of see more of it, um, in that way.
Yeah, it's like a sense of wonder
Yeah.
for me. It's like it's like things zoom out and zoom in at the same time. Just to understand like how vast and how beautiful and how complex um this symphony that we're a part of and also experiencing. So I love that metaphor that you used of the symphony is, and yet at the same time, like that it's all interconnected with us. It's just and then we can open to that, and then we can experience that. It's just an absolutely beautiful thing to me.
Do you think it would be good, useful, interesting to people who are listening if I because I've kind of then talked about the four outermost planets and their significances a little bit. I could do a similar thing for the sun and the moon and the inner planets, just to kind of, I'll keep it fairly brief, but um, just to give a sense of more like the complete picture.
Absolutely.
I'll start in the middle. So the sun, it has to do with for us, it has to do with our sense of identity. In a Jungian sense, it governs the whole spectrum of selfhood. So from the smallest, most defensive ego, all the way up to the highest, most enlightened self. The sun sort of speaks to that wherever we are in that process of self-development, or however we experience selfhood. The sun speaks to that. Also, our capacity for creativity, our creative vitality, our ability to, our kind of willpower, on a kind of surface level, I suppose, or kind of in the day world, our willpower and ability to make changes in the world, and our warmth, our personality. The moon, is the kind of is the yin to all that yang. It's our feelings, um, our emotions, our experience of and need for kinship, our need for nourishment of all kinds, our experience of and need for safety and a home, and it kind of speaks to our domestic lives, and the kind of emotional experience of the everyday world, as well as the kind of more deeply um, felt, reflective, emotional states. So then, next one out from the sun is Mercury. Kind of seems to preside over the entire cognitive arena. So thoughts, ideas, the underlying logic of things. Mercury helps us to perceive, the underlying logic of things, how things are put together. Has to do with language and all kind of sets of signs and symbols that are used to communicate, including numbers as well. Everything like that. Mercury is the root of our word for market and commerce, as well as many other words. It's a very typically mercurial thing that's happened to the word Mercury. It's taken on many meanings and gone into many different kind of arenas of human experience. But that's it speaks to the nature of language and to the nature of the Mercury archetype. Venus, everyone's kind of familiar with Venus, but maybe in kind of typical um, astrological circles, it might seem a bit superficial. She may appear, yeah, kind of frivolous, and for sure, Venus has to do with our pleasure, and often we take pleasure in very frivolous and superficial things. But Venus also uh, refers to the part of us, the kind of soft underbelly, the things that we value most dearly, the places that are unguarded and most easily wounded in us, the heart's desire, love, both romantic love um, and friendship, um, um, and I mean, all the archetypes participate in the kind of greater archetype of love itself, but Venus seems to be very directly um, related to love. Mars is uh, another one that people will have a lot of preconceived notions about, and many of those notions are, well, all of those notions pretty much are correct, but maybe a little paints an incomplete picture. Mars does have to do with aggression, does have to do with war, has to do, also with courage, with bravery, with the kind of uh, the willingness to take a leap of faith. Mars is the kind of catalyst. It's the kind of let's stop talking and do it attitude. Um, Without Mars, I like to say, without Mars, life would be very boring. Not much would happen. Only things that have been carefully considered would happen. And that would probably slow down um, our experience of life to a kind of tedious pace. Um, and then, I guess, last of all, Jupiter, is associated with expansion, magnitude, breadth. Um, it's it it's associated with good fortune and benevolence. It makes everything bigger that it's interacting with, and inflects our. When Jupiter is interacting with something else in our psyches, it inflects our attitude about that thing towards the positive, as well as making positive outcomes uh, more available, more likely. Um, it also has to do with confidence, and so you know all of these archetypes are spectrums. Um, Jupiter's a very clear one to make that point, you know, because yes, on the one hand, it has to do with fortune, with positive outcomes, with confidence. On the other hand, it definitely also has to do with greed, with hubris and overconfidence, arrogance. The kind of Icarusian flying too close to the sun impulse that we all share. So I hope that was not kind of too much information overload all in one go like that, but it's there if people are interested.
Yeah, I think more and more during this conversation, what's coming up for me is like when people say like uh, we're the universe experiencing itself. That's what it's reminding me of, because it's these different. It's like, almost like I'm picturing this reflection of just a collective, these different parts of our personality. I think I'm just going to keep the curiosity during this, this episode, and rather than saying I'm going to come away with some definitive answers that I didn't have before, and just enjoy it for, for the fact that you're sharing all this knowledge, and just being open to the wonder and the mystery of it.
Yeah. Great. Everything is related to everything. This is something that comes up both through the psychedelic work and through the astrological work. It's like in a field of synchronicity, that there's a meaningful relationship between any 2 points. Some more meaningful than others, probably, depending on your perspective. But, you said earlier an interesting phrase. You said, just breathe with it. And, that's, there's a quote from Plotinus, the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, which really well describes, and anticipates Jung's thoughts about synchronicity. It says everything breathes together. The universe is full of signs. Can't remember the precise quote, but that's the idea. We're all breathing in the same air. The planets, the animals, the plant life, the rocks, the humans. It's all part of the same organism, in some sense.
Yeah, I wish I had more words for this, because it's like, it's to me, it's almost this feeling that I can connect to, and when I'm open and I remember that connection is so close, that it can be in the wind blowing through the trees, or just observing my breath, or something, just something very simple within my environment. It makes me feel still. It makes me feel grateful. Also, I guess the other sort of metaphor that's coming up around this is like, let's say you go to like a great art museum. You go to the Louvre, right? Like, I don't think there's a more famous art museum than the Louvre. Even if you don't know anything about the painters, the artists, or anything about art history, art appreciation, there might be a piece there that's so striking to you that it just stops you in your tracks, that you connect with it on a level beyond the cognition. And then you can go and learn about that artist or that particular style or the history of, whatever it is. And then it enriches that experience. But you don't have to have that to get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like that's some of what we're talking about here. It's like we're adding in some levels and some layers and some background and some perspective that we're all participating in, whether we know it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not. And then, being able to have some more of that background, to me, is very enriching and really fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
So I think that, and I think that leads into like a good question, which is like, how can the average person integrate some of what we've been talking about into their transformational work? How would you suggest that they approach that?
Yeah. It's a really important question, how to kind of come down from the abstract level, or kind of even if we're standing in wonder at it, what does it mean for us? So for people who are considering doing psychedelic therapy, and people who are involved with breathwork, I guess that's who I'll kind of mostly speak to.
Sure.
First of all, as preparation for psychedelic therapy sessions, or for medicine ceremonies, or for holotropic breathwork, it's important to remember that astrology is only archetypally predictive, right? So we're not going to. It's important not to slip into the kind of. I mean, it's difficult because there's definitely magic in the universe. But there's a kind of magical thinking that we can slip into, which has a kind of desperation about it, has a kind of attachment about it, a desire to control things. So everything that I'll say in a minute about how to use astrology as a preparation tool for psychedelic therapy, it comes with that caveat. Um, if astrology engenders an attitude in you that makes you seek increasing levels of control over the experience that you're having or wanting to have, then you shouldn't use it at all. It's the kind of tool that you have to be able to let go of, and a big help in that is understanding that the archetypes themselves they're multivalent, so they are spectrums of possible experience. They're not specific experiences. So, with that said, there are times when it's good to look at the chart before a session. In particular, going back to the perinatal matrices, anyone who's had experiences of perinatal material surfacing, people might not even realize that that's what it was. But if you've had experiences, particularly of BPM2 and BPM3 coming up, so that would be experiences of coldness for BPM2, loneliness, abandonment, feelings of being stuck or trapped, feelings of being kind of cruelly, punitively kind of stopped, limited and constrained in your experience. That would all be BPM2. And for BPM3, experiences of intense fear, feeling of danger, being scared that you're going to die. These are all things that can arise when BPM3 is being re-experienced and ultimately being consumed, from the psyche. These are good things to happen during a session. But we can use the outer planets to see when it's more likely that material will surface. Absolutely those things are not to be avoided. Stan said at some point, this is something that I heard Ren, my astrology teacher, say that Stan said, just to lay that out, that he prefers to do sessions during what people would think of as difficult transits, because that way you can consume more karma, and you don't have to carry it around the whole rest of the time. I've had experiences in psilocybin sessions of really intense fear, just nothing but fear, fear and doubt, just wanting it to end, trying to get out, not being able to get out. Sort of toing and froing between that BPM2 state and the BPM3 state. 1 minute feeling trapped and the next minute feeling very much in danger. And that session was able to resolve into a very blissful and pretty hilarious kind of state. And I felt really good at the end of it. And following that, I'm carrying around less fear, less doubt, less shame, whatever it is. So those are all good things to happen. But it is good to know if they might come up. For example, if you feel like there's a high chance that you might be experiencing BPM2, then if you have any wounds of omission from childhood, so a lack of physical contact as a young child, or if you were separated from your mother or have difficult childhood memories surrounding that, um, then during Saturn transits, there's a high chance that stuff is going to come up. And, Stan has found that those psychological wounds can be healed very straightforwardly in psychedelic therapy, provided that there's the availability of warm human contact. There needs to be that. Otherwise, you could deepen those wounds. So, if you struggle with that type of thing, for instance, and you want to do psychedelic therapy, then you should do it. if that's your path, and you feel really set on it and clear that that's something that you want to try, then you should. And if you have a Saturn transit, that's no reason not to do it. But it is a reason to make sure that you have a sitter, and to make sure that you have clear, clearly verbalized, well communicated agreements about what kind of physical contact is permitted and is appropriate, and good ways of communicating during the session that you would like physical contact, or that you would like the physical contact to stop. Language can be difficult. So things like that, if you're going to have BPM-3 material surfacing, then you might get very active. You might need to yell. You might need to pound the floor. You might want to move around a lot. You might be very compelled, especially if, say, Mars is involved in a Pluto alignment. You might feel very compelled to get up and leave, get up off the mat, go outside, go and do something physical. And, depending on your set and setting, that might be okay. But it's generally not something I personally would advise. And it might be that you need a sitter in a situation like that who is capable of physically overpowering you in a gentle and pre-agreed, clearly communicated way. Or you might need two sitters, who can kind of form a solid wall to stop you from, leaving the house and walking out down a busy road, because that's what you feel like doing. Right. So there are some things like that I believe it's very, very much a vital tool for. And I could give more and more examples, and we could get into more and more detail, but it's probably enough to sort of give a taste. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. Well, I'll say this before I launch into my curiosity of, I think some of what you just described is good best practices, regardless of whether you're paying attention to the astrology, right? In terms of communication and clear boundaries with the sitters. As somebody that's running breathwork circles that are aligning with the full moon, are there other things that I should be looking for as far as creating that container? Because so far it's been like, okay, there's the full moon, and then sometimes I'll look at what sign the moon is in as kind of a, just sort of an idea of what people might be going through, just kind of energetically. But I'd be curious in terms of like making that container even more special. Like, are there other things that I could consider or research?
I think there are many things to consider. The most driving forces in the psyche are the four outer planets, in my view. So it's always worth paying attention to them. And they're very slow moving, so the dynamics involving those planets will last for months or years at a time. So if you're looking for a day in a kind of within a lunar cycle to choose, then in all likelihood, those dynamics are kind of going on in the background, and it's not going to change from day to day. Paying attention to the moon if I'm say I'm thinking about doing some breath work or a psychedelic session sometime in the next month, I'll definitely look at the moon. You know, it's it's how things land with us personally that is governed by the moon. You know, it's how we react emotionally when stuff comes up. So uh, it might not seem as potent a force as, say, Pluto or Saturn or Uranus. Um, but it really does. I've found in my sessions, it does seem to really affect how I react, and obviously how we react to material that comes up. Um, you know, it creates that feedback loop, and if we're able to be open to what's coming up, then we can go deeper and deeper into it, and that's also the good. Um, so, in a word, uh, there's no, there's not like a one or two things to look out for. You know, there's always things you can look at in a chart, but the major dynamics change too slowly for it to be a sort of concern on a daily basis. Um, and the kind of um, yeah, there's a lot of other concerns, but nothing major. You know, almost every combination of dynamics as depicted by the chart is worth experiencing in an expanded state. You know, if we're moving towards wholeness. You know, so
Right.
experiences um, of loss and loneliness are just as valuable as experiences of breakthroughs and ecstasy and bliss. Um, that you know,
Yes.
it's all worth going through in an expanded state. Um, there is kind of one exception to this, um, which I can mention. It's worth mentioning because it's kind of coming up. So
Yeah.
um, it seems as though combinations of Saturn and Neptune are quite difficult for journeying under. Um, not to say that it shouldn't be done. Saturn and Neptune, when they're constellated together in the sky, in any of the angles in any of the kind of quote unquote hard aspects, so conjunctions, oppositions, and squares, um, it can be difficult, you know, because Neptune is the transcendent principle itself. It it really encompasses a lot of psychedelic experience. Um, it is the divine ground of being. Um, so when it's in dynamic interaction with Saturn, um, we can have experiences of meaninglessness, you know, loss of spiritual connection. Um, you know, Saturn can really clamp down on our feeling of interconnectedness. It can be an experience of loss of oneness. Um, these these experiences are valuable to go through, provided that there's um, every chance possible being provided that there's every chance for the session to resolve well. So, provided you have good set and setting, provided there's a sitter. Um, but for facilitators, it's worth noting that there's a conjunction in the sky between Saturn and Neptune between April of next year and May of 2027. Um, so it's a long
Wow.
lasting dynamic, and it's quite a contrast to the dynamics that we've had for the last couple of years. And it it might mean that people feel more blocked. It might mean that people need more support. It might be harder to access Neptunian states of oceanic spirituality. The Saturn and Neptune, I think it's the same conjunction that happened, you know, in halfway through 1972, at the end of the true kind of spiritual end of the 60s. You know, So it's something to watch out for. And there's certain periods within that where Mars is also significantly joining that conjunction in different ways. So when Mars gets involved, it can bring up it can make us very angry about the experience that we're having or not having. Mars and Saturn together can be obstinate, can be stubborn. It's like the unstoppable force meets the immovable object. So to refer to Ren again, he always talks about it as like tripping under Mars, Saturn, Neptune's like going camping in the rain. Like you can do it, and you might have a good time, regardless. But if you know it's going to rain, do you really want to go camping? If you know for sure it's going to rain. So there are some times, sort of March until mid-May of next year, August until mid-September of next year, August the following year. That those will be challenging times for people doing this kind of work, and if you can avoid it, you may choose to do that, and if you're a facilitator, you may wish to kind of be prepared.
Take a
vacation. I mean, you could plan your vacations or just being prepared. People might not have the experiences they want, and it might be difficult for the experiences that they do have to resolve in a kind of peaceful or joyful way. We should have those experiences that we don't want to have, but we would like it. It's better. It's more healing. If it resolves in a peaceful or a joyful, ecstatic, kind of a way. So I just thought I'd mention those dates. It's seeing as we're talking about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm curious if you would say more about those difficult experiences and the value of having them. I really like what you said about the karma completing, and I think you could say that something similar from the lens of the nervous system, right? Is like the reason that we're carrying around that karma is that there is an incomplete experience. That charge is still active and can become reactivated based on re-experiencing or something that's reminding us on a cellular or nervous system level. But speak a little bit more about the value of having those experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I think I mentioned this phrase before. It's in my personal experience, it certainly feels as though it's possible to consume those difficult energies from the psyche. I think it was Stan that said it, but it could have been somebody else. But the phrase has stuck with me, that it's almost as though every human being is kind of born into this world with as much suffering as you're ever going to get. Like when we're in the womb, up to the point where labor starts, we're at one, not just with the mother, but for all intents and purposes, with the entire rest of the universe. We're connected. We're in an ideal state. And once labor starts and the chemical balance of the womb changes and there's not enough space and we are disconnected, before we have any linguistic or cognitive machinery that will help us to contextualize that or make sense of it, we go through, the most terrifying and dangerous experience that we're ever going to go through. And so as a result of that, we kind of have a well of those experiences within us. And, going through reliving some of that stuff, or going through experiences that are thematically have a similar tone, or archetypally have the same tone, or evoke the same complex. It's like going to the well with a bucket. And sometimes literally it's a bucket of tears. You just go there and you just pull up some of that trauma, some of that suffering, and express it. Fully feel it, and fully express it, and thereby, you have a little bit less of it to carry around in your day-to-day life. And you can sort of, if you don't do this kind of work, and I don't just mean psychedelic work, there's lots of ways to get in contact with our our deeply held feelings and emotions and express them. But if you don't have any way of doing it, then you get this constant drip, drip, drip of it into your daily life. And it might seem more manageable in the short term, but it really is worse. Like, it really, like, I try to remain agnostic about a lot of stuff that probably hasn't come across in this podcast. But I'm not agnostic about that. It's definitely worse to just go through life with that drip of suffering. It's not that medicine work or breath work is a panacea that's going to cure everything that's wrong with your life. You come back from your sessions and life is still filled with constant work that needs to be done.
Sure.
And that is what it is. But it's a case of how do you feel while you're doing that work? What are you able to how are you able to relate to the world around you, to the people around you? Like, if you've consumed some of that suffering, if you've expressed it, and you're not carrying so much of it around, what's the nature of the work you're able to do after that? So I guess that's my feelings about it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This is beautiful. And then I think as a follow-up question, what are some of the ways that have helped you open to that experience? Because, you came to one of my breathwork sessions, and, not to put you on the spot, but it seemed like you had a pretty profound emotional experience. And one of my observations was like admiration that, here it was the first time that we had worked together, your first time coming into this group, and even in the privacy of your own home, you're still sort of in a new environment, and that you were really willing to let go of whatever resistance was there. And I know that that's a very common experience for people. And sometimes it's almost like a practice to be able to open that completely in the moment. That doesn't often come during the first experience. Yeah. So I just wanted to say thank you for being willing to go there and be there for yourself in that way. But also just, if you had any words of wisdom or advice for people that are finding themselves in that resistance as they come into these experiences.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. And I think it's a good moment to acknowledge my privilege in this conversation, because so much of um, what makes it possible to go there is like a intrinsic inner feeling of safety. Um,
Mm.
and I know that that is a luxury that not everybody has. So I'm very grateful to be in that position, and I don't want to sort of make a statement that kind of makes anyone feel like they are somehow deficient or insufficient for not being in that place where it's possible um, to so
Yeah.
straightforwardly surrender. You know, I'm not scared of being persecuted because I'm a white straight man living in a city that's also mostly populated by you know mostly middle class straight white people, and it's all very comfortable. Um, and I'm lucky that I mean we all carry trauma, we all have suffering, and to a certain extent, it's pointless to compare one person's suffering to another. But at the same time, um, I don't have PTSD. I haven't fought in a war zone. I haven't been sexually abused. So these are things. These are the kinds of things that might prevent some people from immediately being able to kind of open up, trust the process, surrender to what is happening, and you know, to those people, like, fair play, like, for going there and trying, and um, and
Absolutely.
whatever can be done to support and encourage uh, people in that situation. I will do it if I can, and I hope that other people are also doing it. Um, so those are some of the things that are like blockages to surrender. Um, and with that said, there's more things, um, things that I have had to encounter. What some people would call monkey mind. Habitual patterns of thought, or patterns of reaction that kind of set off chains of thought, which ultimately become distractions from what one is trying to do uh, in breathwork or psychedelic therapy. Um, you know, ego defenses often take the form of distraction. Um, you know, what about this thing? Instead of, I'm just here to breathe and feel my emotions. That's a kind of mantra that you could have in your mind when you're there to go through the process and it's not happening because there are thoughts coming up. You can have a word with yourself and say, I'm just here to breathe and feel my emotions. So that's what or we, that's what we are here to do. Whatever feels most kind of, appropriate and authentic. Another thing that comes up is, um, another form that resistance takes is kind of critique. Um, like, it's very easy. It can be very easy to feel like, the situation is just not right. The space is not being held in the way that I would like. I have these, I have better ideas about how this should be done, and it's like, yeah, okay, noticing those thoughts coming up. But again, like, I'm just, I've made a decision to sit and feel my emotions and breathe, and that's what I want to do. Or it's a little bit different with the psychedelics, obviously, but being able to surrender uh, is very important. Um, with psychedelics, personal like fallback that I kind of land on is like reverence, respect, curiosity. Uh, that's my recipe for the possibility of surrendering. um, it's like I need to be respectful of the space that I'm entering. And beyond that, I need that to deepen into a feeling of reverence for what is happening around me. And I just need to remember to be curious about what's coming up. Be able to move towards it, be able to go deeper. As to what makes it possible for me personally to do it. I could list off a bunch of stuff that's in my natal chart. I have a very exact opposition between the moon and Pluto, for example. That it's like my heart is open to the transformative process. Almost dispositionally. Almost by nature, like I'm ready. Kind of born ready to transform for the kind of transformation and rebirth of my soul on on a regular basis. I'm kind of a sucker for it. I guess the other things that I was thinking about when thinking about this question was all that stuff, the monkey mind, the critique, the ways that the mind resists. It's all kind of part of our normal functioning, right? It's like going into an expanded state of consciousness. The mind has protections against that because we need to maintain a very kind of normalized state of consciousness where our perception is working in a certain way, our nervous system is operating at a certain level. We need to almost all of the time stay in quite a narrow band of the possibilities that consciousness offers us. So the task for if you want to be able to let go more, if you want to be able to surrender quicker, more deeply, is do things that stretch that band of consciousness just a little bit, on a regular basis. For people that struggle to feel their emotions deeply, it can be something as simple as just set aside 10 minutes every day to just lie down and do nothing but feel your emotions, and don't try to change them. Don't try to do anything about them or do anything with them. Just feel them, and set a timer and do that. Don't focus on your breathing. Don't do a body scan. There's nothing clever about it. It's just lie down and feel how you feel, and don't engage in distraction. Other things that work for me, breathwork itself can be like that, right? The holotropic breathwork can be like that, because you start doing the deep breathing, and it's like, God, I hate this. I don't want to do this. My body is, the technique is coming in, and my body is giving me lots of signals that I don't want to do this. But it's like, just do it. Just do it a bit. Widen that band of experience. And there's loads of ways to do it. Cold water practices are like that as well. Sort of just do something that your instincts and your mind tells you not to do, as long as you know that it's a healthy thing to do, that it's okay to do it. Don't go and put your hand in the oven, but things that research and authoritative sources have shown are safe. Just doing those things, I guess, is helpful. So that was a bit of a long ramble, but I hope I said some
No,
some valuable things in
I, I love the long ramble. Yeah, no, it was great. And I, mm, I appreciate that you began by predicating it on safety, and that um, that there is a privilege in that, and there an acknowledgement. I think I think that's going to be something I'm going to be kind of thinking
there.
about later. You know, um, later today, for instance, I'm going to go to my job as a specialty therapist at a inpatient, treatment center for behavioral and
Mm.
mental health, and do some breath work with people and do some mindfulness practice. And I'm never sure what people's reaction is going to be, and I think that oftentimes the breath work that we're doing is the equivalent of a
Mm.
microdose as opposed to some sort of heroic journey. And I've watched people have extremely profound experiences within that. I've also watched other people nope the hell
Mm.
out of it before they even start. They're just like, nope, we're not doing that. This is not for me today. And uh, a lot of my work, I think, after the initial gut response of feeling some sort of responsibility for the outcome, after I've divorced myself from that, is remembering exactly what you're saying, that there is a privilege in safety that not everybody has access to, and that everybody is doing the best that they can based on the the situation that they're in and that they've experienced. And um and meeting people exactly there, and being gentle and
Yeah.
compassionate with that.
And also resistance is part of the process. Experiencing resistance is like that's all a part of it. So experiencing being blocked, experiencing disappointment, um, like, um, yeah, it's what I keep coming back to. I guess it's like, yeah, fully experience that stuff when it's while you have the opportunity, while it's safe. While there's someone there who's looking out for you, while someone's making a space and a container for you to feel that stuff, then yeah, get stuck in.
Yeah, it's something that one of my breathwork mentors talks about. He calls breathwork going to the surrender gym. And it's like, it's all well and good when you have that first peak experience, and then you're like, I want to do this again. And then what happens when that
Mm,
doesn't come up? What happens when you spend an hour huffing and puffing and like not going anywhere? The monkey mind is just really
mm.
latched on, and you're not having that peak experience. Like, what's your reaction to that? Like, what's that like? Can you sit in the surrender gym and like be with that, and like let that be the experience that you had during the session, rather than like, well, this sucks because I didn't have some sort of like peak, transpersonal
Yeah,
experience
yeah.
today.
Where's my awakening?
It's all a
I
part.
sure I ordered an awakening.
Right. That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. um, so just to kind of come full circle, I wondered what you feel is the vital point for this conversation. As I was doing my research, I came across something on your website that I quite liked, and I'd like to
Of
share it
course,
if it's
yeah.
okay. And maybe there's some reflection on that as well. Life feels fullest to me when I can remember how it feels to be held deeply in the glowing heart of the universe, when things slow down and get so calm that it feels as though my heart might contain the entire cosmos, when the unfathomable awe of existing as a self-conscious life form brings on a swaying kind of vertigo, or when the unquenchable and exquisitely profound grief of human existence sweeps over me like a tremendous wave of icy water.
I kind of when I was first trying to write about Jung, the sentiment of that was also in the introduction. Um, it's kind of like there's all these clues that everything's not meaningless, and it can be small things. It might be you do a yoga practice, and at the end of the session, you're lying in the fetal position or in corpse pose or however you're lying, and suddenly you just start crying. And there's not necessarily even any why to it. But in that moment, you know that life is not meaningless. You're not, you might feel lonely in that moment, but you're not on a cosmic level. You know that you're not alone. You're participating in something, or it might be, something as innocuous. I get it all the time, like watching sports. It's like I'm like Wimbledon is on at the moment. Something about that where it's just one on one, and you see the turmoil that the person is going through, and they just, they hit one good point, and they might even still lose the game, but you see what it means to them in that moment, and it's like, and like while you're feeling that, it's like this is being alive, even if it's only just a tiny fleeting moment. It's not profound in any sort of measurable way, except in your subjective experience. And then obviously there are the more profound versions of that. There's the sitting on the top of the mountain, there's the watching the most beautiful sunset you've ever watched. There's the falling in love with somebody and connecting with them for the first time. Obviously there's the there's the wide variety of very intense experiences that are available to us in expanded states. But for me, all of that's on a kind of continuum, of like things that make me know that I'm alive. And then the vital point, as far as this conversation goes, if there is a point, I don't think it can be more vital than that, really. But, in the context of talking about archetypal astrology and psychedelics, I think the point, the reason to be remotely interested in archetypal astrology is that as one learns about the archetypes and the way that they interact, as one learns to see how that's happening in the world around us, you start to train your instincts on something that's profoundly real, that goes beyond the material. Because if we just train our instincts on a kind of materialistic paradigm, then we end up, if we're not careful, in what can be quite a depressing and nihilistic place. So you kind of need something else to train your instincts on, especially if you're going to be doing work where what you're experiencing is, you've got the eye mask on, you've got your however many grams or milligrams of potent substances in your system, or you're doing the breathing, and you're experiencing basically a purely symbolic world for that time. And if you want to have good instincts for what any of the stuff that's happening means, then they need to be trained on something real, something tangible, but something that acknowledges the fact that the universe is inherently a meaningful place. And so that's why I would advocate for archetypal astrology. People can do psychedelic work without doing astrology. People can perfectly express the archetypal dynamics that are coming through them without knowing anything about their astrology. If they're on a path, if they have a practice, if they have community and guidance, and access to wisdom, then astrology is not necessarily a necessity for helping. But what it definitely can do is open up the symbolic world and make it intelligible to us, so that when we're then going into the symbolic realm and searching for insight, searching for wisdom, we have naturally at our disposal good instincts, good interpretive tools. Go and screw up the integration by trying to play out all of the symbolic stuff in a purely material way. That you hear the stories about people changing their career or selling their house or leaving their spouse or whatever it is. It's a mistake of believing that we have to do things in the material realm. We have to make material changes, and we do have to exist in the material realm. And when things are wrong in the material realm, we have to make changes. But those kind of changes, whilst they can be informed, certainly by kind of a grounded interpretation of our more intense experiences, they need to be co-informed by material reality. Anyway, I feel like I'm straying beyond the vital point, but hopefully it's
that's okay.
It's in there somewhere.
Beautiful. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm curious if you'd like to talk for a minute or two about your services and how people can get a hold of you. You're doing some coaching alongside the archetypal astrology work as well, right?
So I've been working as a coach longer than I've been practicing as an astrologer, and if in the unlikely event that anyone who's listening to this remains totally closed to archetypal astrology, but would like to work with me nonetheless as a coach, that's an option. I'm perfectly happy to work with people in a one-to-one way, in a totally non-astrological way. My motto there is like, you'll probably find it easier to find stuff out about a person by simply asking them than you will by trying to decipher it from their natal chart and transits. Not always, but most of the time, especially if people want to talk. I offer one-to-one coaching. I obviously offer archetypal astrology readings, so that can be kind of diving into your natal chart, the way things were, the timestamp of your birth from an archetypal perspective, and it can also include looking at your transits, so the kind of active dynamics for you kind of in the current moment and kind of up to a year in advance. Probably best to not look too far in advance, stay in the moment and all that. And I offer also a 6-week program of like what I call astrological coaching, which can go in a number of different directions, but generally it's a good chance to kind of have a deep dive into your chart and get familiar with every part of it. And then we can also look at pivotal times in your life. If there's events that happen that you'd like some more insight into, we can we can look at the transits that were happening at that time, and it's a good chance to learn a little bit more about astrology, get more familiar with your own astrology, and sort of gradually get more towards the point where you can be your own astrologer. And yeah, in the autumn I'm going to be running online. I think I'm going to call it like astrological campfires. Where people can come, and there'll be a number of talented astrologers, a number of, I imagine, like total newbies, a number of kind of people who are kind of on that journey somewhere, where we'll analyze. The invitation will be for people to bring kind of, if they've done psychedelic sessions or breath work and they've got session reports that they'd like to look at, or if people have dreams that they'd like analyzed, or if there's like a specific area in life, a life event that's upcoming, or something that's just happening or just happened, then the group will be able to kind of facilitate the interpretation and just generally dialogue and do a bit of group work around it. So yeah, that's probably enough to plug. If people want to know what I'm up to, they can friend me on Facebook. It's Jonathan Waller. They can follow me on Instagram. They can check out my website. I'm sure it's all in the show notes.
Yes, we'll definitely be linking that to for people to check out. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for staying up late and for sharing your expertise and viewpoint and understanding with us. It's been very illuminating for me, and also just thought-provoking. I really enjoy these sort of podcasts where I go away with something like really to chew on and kind of digest a little bit more. So appreciate you bringing those deep topics in. I truly hope you found value and inspiration in this episode. If it struck a chord with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you take a moment and leave the podcast a review. It's a simple, cost-free way to show support and help more like-minded people discover the show. Also, make sure you sign up for my newsletter at beacons.ai/Blue Magic Alchemy to be the first to get updates, exclusive content, and insights delivered straight to your inbox. It's a fantastic way to stay connected and keep the cultivation of wisdom going. And when you sign up, I'll send you a free guide to using breathwork for integration as a way to show my gratitude for your support. Remember, it's not about the method you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself in practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I'm honored to accompany you on yours. Don't hesitate to reach out, connect, share your journey, successes, and challenges alike. I'm just an email, DM, or review away. Thanks again for tuning in. Until our next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.